We can jump right into it. So, the first thing I'd love for you to share is just your story, as far back as you want to go, personally, professionally, as a professor, um, in business, whatever you want to share.
Okay, sure. I got into research it was as a fluke. I wasn't really planning on it. I was having a nice career, a professional career working in consultancy and whatnot. And then I happened to come across somebody who really inspired me to start delving deeper into research. And as I did, I just turned out I loved it. My wife, since 30 years now, but since many years back already then. She once walked past me late at night. I was sitting in front of my computer working, and she said, "You're like a fish back in water." And I just looked around and said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, this is what you were meant to do." And I
Mm.
thought about it for about a minute, and I said, "Yeah, you're right." This was I started my dissertation in 95, and I loved it. I have a family business background, so doing research on entrepreneurship and small business came very natural to me. So I was working in this space for quite some time, and then back in 2008, in January, I moved to the US, and so I'm from Sweden originally. So I did my PhD in the beginning of my career
Mhm.
over there, and then I moved to the US in 2008, and not too long thereafter, I ran into mental health problems. And for the first time, I had contacts with the mental health profession. And I was getting diagnosed left and right, more or less. And ended up realizing that I have, you know, typical symptoms of ADHD, and I've had that through my whole life. And I was just amazed that, I started reading as a scholar. The
Mhm.
first thing you do when you want to learn something is you start reading the scientific literature on a topic. And
Mhm.
so I started reading about ADHD, and I was just amazed at how good they were at pinpointing all the things that were all wrong with me, so to say, all the problems I was having. But at the same time, I got a bit confused because I'm a reasonably successful guy. I mean, I've been married over 30 years. I have
Mhm.
two happy, successful children. I've done a good professional career. So I thought to myself, well, they point to all these negative things, but there's got to be there's got to be some upside, because how can I be this successful if everything is wrong with me? So I started seeing, well, there has to be some kind of flip side, some kind of positive side,
Mhm.
because it was obvious just thinking about myself. And then, as an entrepreneurship scholar, I also saw right away these relationships to entrepreneurship. So I could see that these same traits that I have been able to harness, I thought that could potentially apply to entrepreneurs as well. So I
Mhm.
essentially cold call a colleague in psychology, clinical psychology. He's written more than 200 papers on
Mhm.
ADHD. And I said, "Kevin, how about you come and have lunch with me? I'll treat you to lunch at a nice place." And he said, "Yes." I never seen the man before. We went there and I pitched this idea. I said, "Kevin, I think that people with ADHD can do really well in entrepreneurship. And these are the reasons why I think so." And I said, "Does that make any sense at all to you?" And he thought about it. He's a very thoughtful person. So he thought about it for a while and then said, "I have a lot of patients, and I've seen that many of them can do well in certain jobs." And he said, in particular, as traveling salesmen. That's what he had found. But
Mhm.
what you say about entrepreneurship and ADHD seems very reasonable. It corresponds to my own uh, casual observations. So that's what he said. And I thought to myself, well, if somebody like him, coming from the camp of ADHD, can see these connections and think they make sense, I'm probably onto something.
Mhm.
And then, of course, over the years, I discovered that there are a couple of other people were a couple of other people over in Europe that have made similar observations. And of course, I got in touch with them. And since then, I've been able to build a community of scholars I'm doing a lot of activities to kind of increase the scholarly interest in this topic. As you know, I think it's very important for a variety of reasons. But that's essentially how I came into this research area. I'd be happy to talk about anything in terms of, what I've done to date or what we are
Right.
aiming at looking at in the future.
Yeah, so that's how I discovered you actually was your paper, the mental disorders in the entrepreneurial context when being different can be an advantage.
Yeah,
And so I would really love to talk about that a little bit because I
I'd
think
be happy to do that.
mental health has this sort of stigma to it that, like you said, is very negative. When you
Yeah,
started diving into the research on ADHD,
absolutely.
you started to realize that a lot of it was negative.
Absolutely.
But there's a flip side to everything, and you really discovered that, and you discussed that in this paper and probably a lot of other papers as well. So what would you have to say about how mental health can be used, mental health obstacles, quote unquote, can be used as an advantage for an entrepreneur?
Okay, I'll talk specifically about that paper because I think it's interesting because that's actually the first thing I did. So I started thinking to myself, okay, I think there might be some connections between ADHD specifically, but possibly also mental health diagnosis and entrepreneurship. So what I did was I turned to one of those support organizations, happens to be one over in Sweden, and I essentially said, if you are an entrepreneur and if you have a diagnosis of any kind, please be in touch.
Hmm.
And I established contact with a little over 25 people that had diagnoses of, in particular, ADHD, but dyslexia, autism, and also Tourette syndrome,
Hmm.
OCD, and a few other ones. So I essentially interviewed those 27 or whatever people, seeing how uh, how they were able to perform in entrepreneurship and how their symptoms related to entrepreneurship.
Hmm.
And then what I found extremely interesting was that for those with ADHD, it seemed that it was actually the very symptoms that are used in the diagnosis that were helpful. So that's important because I could see that, for example, people with dyslexia, it's well known that they have different brain structures. They're often very creative. They have this ability to make connections and they have different spatial abilities. And it turned out that those were very valuable in entrepreneurship. But of course, those are not directly tied to the diagnosis per se. Same thing I found with some of the people with an autism diagnosis that they could capitalize on specific traits. For example, I interviewed two people that had they were working with images. Was working with photography. The other one was working with as an AD, working in advertising, and they were talking about the fact that they see things differently, literally. I
Hmm.
mean, their visual impressions are different than other people, and that they could harness that into their businesses. But so that was extremely interesting as well. But I found that this thing about ADHD, uh, the fact that it was the ADHD symptoms themselves that seemed to be bear out in entrepreneurship in a positive way. So I can say a few words about, if you want to, about that more specifically.
Yeah, I would love to know specifically what some of those symptoms are that can be used in entrepreneurship.
Yeah, yeah. So if you have an ADHD diagnosis or if you have the symptoms of ADHD, those are related to inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. And impulsivity means that you have a hard time waiting. You kind of have this bias for action. You speak before you think, for example, or you act before you think, right?
Hmm.
And those kinds of things. And if you think about it, entrepreneurship is characterized by uncertainty. Essentially, there's no way of knowing for sure if you are going to succeed before you've tried. But what we learn if you go to school, for example, you learn that if there's high uncertainty, what you're supposed to do is sit back, collect more information, so that uncertainty is reduced, and then you start acting. Well, if you do that in entrepreneurship, the opportunity might be gone, right? But if you have this impulsivity, you're not very good at waiting. You kind of develop this um, style of acting that you act first, see what happens, and then if things don't go well, you change and do something different. And that's very conducive to entrepreneurship. That's
Mhm.
actually what we teach in entrepreneurship, that don't just sit back, wait, make plans, because the plans are never going to turn out the way you think anyway. It's better to actually do something, see what happens, and then pivot if things don't go well. And that very kind of mode of action that we find is successful entrepreneurship is perfectly suited to somebody who's impulsive.
Hmm.
So that was one of those things that I found absolutely remarkable. And I've interviewed since then probably 100, or I should say interviewed. I've interviewed and spoken to probably close to 100 people with ADHD, either the diagnosis or a lot of ADHD symptoms. And this comes up all the time. That I can't just sit back and wait. I have to do stuff. I have to act, and that's why I'm in entrepreneurship. And I met a lot of people who say I started a business, I started 10 businesses, and then I get bored, and then I sell them or close them, and then I start a new one. So
Mhm.
it seems that seems to me like a very interesting feature of the ADHD condition that is very conducive to entrepreneurship.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's, you hear a lot about analysis paralysis. Um,
Exactly.
and that's something that, used to affect me more than it does now as an entrepreneur. And I've gotten better at making quicker decisions. And,
Yeah.
but a lot of people struggle with analyzing and planning. And a month goes by and they've done no actual work. And
Exactly. And I mean,
so,
I'm a professor at a business school, and essentially, most courses we teach are very analysis oriented. So when they come to me to take an entrepreneurship class, I mean, they often come because they have an interest in entrepreneurship, but they still have this mindset that it's all about writing a business plan, it's all about analyzing. And, you can write the most perfect business plan that's going to take you several months, and I'm not gonna diss business plans to say that they're useless, but I mean they certainly have to be paired with an intense level of action. I might let me go back before we delve deeper into this and say a few things about more generally, mental disorders or disability in general and
mhm,
entrepreneurship. I also think it's really important to think about the fact that there's another unique thing about entrepreneurship, and that is that you shape the work yourself, and you can do that to fit your own strengths and weaknesses.
mhm,
And if you have any kind of disability or a mental disorder, you have certain weaknesses, right? That's why you have the disability in the first place. But you have, of course, developed ways of handling. You develop certain strengths, and as an entrepreneur, you can actually shape your work to fit that. I can give you an example. Um, I can stay within ADHD and say a lot of people with ADHD, they have disturbed sleep patterns, so they might wake up like 4 or 5 in the morning, and might be full of energy. Then, of course, if you run your own business, you can start working 4 a.m. But on the other hand, you might crash at 10 and have to take a nap for an hour. I mean, there's not a lot of employers who will be
mhm.
happy if you just say it's 10 a.m. I got to go take a nap for an hour. I mean, it's probably hard
Probably
for
not.
you. No, and it's hard for you to even find that space, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, if you have your own business, and I mean, you can have be working from home, but you can have a business with 200 employees. I mean, you can design an office so that you have a place where you can have a bed and go and take your nap for an hour.
Yeah.
It's so that's very important, and that applies to any kind of disability. I mean, I know a person who's blind who runs a cafe, and
Hmm.
he's been able to hire people and design this cafe and choose his work tasks so that he can be very productive. And of course, I think it's very difficult for a blind person to walk up to a cafe and say, I really want to work for you in your cafe. I think the first reaction is, well, if you're blind, you can't really be productive in my cafe.
Hmm.
But if you design it yourself, you can design it so that you can be productive. So
Yeah.
that's the other important aspect of this link between disability general and entrepreneurship.
Yeah, there's a lot of freedom that comes
Oh
with
yeah, exactly,
choosing when to work, where to work, what you want to work
exactly,
on.
exactly.
And I think it's powerful, when you get to a certain level where you have a certain amount of revenue, you can then only work on things that you have that are strengths of yours, and you can sort of
Yes,
outsource or hire people for the weaknesses. And then
exactly,
it becomes very productive and scalable at that point.
exactly. And that's what I've seen in my research that a lot of people do. And
Yeah.
it's very interesting that a lot of people also, in particular those with ADHD, uh, it seems that a consistent thing is that they hate doing the books, just hate it. And there's essentially three options. One is you don't do it at all.
Yep.
And then, of course, IRS comes chasing after you sooner or later, and
Yeah.
you're in deep trouble, right?
Yeah.
The other option, which is by far the most common, is that you have a partner, usually a romantic partner,
Hmm.
that does it for you.
Yep.
And the third option is, of course, you have a business partner or just a professional firm that does it for you.
Hmm.
But it's like nobody I've ever talked to does it themselves.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, a reasonably high proportion just don't do it at all,
Hmm.
and therefore they end up failing pretty quickly.
Hmm.
But usually they fail once, and then the second time around they understand that it's not a feasible way. I just
Yeah.
need somebody. I can't do it myself because it just creates anxiety, and
Yeah.
therefore, if you're really bad at it, if it creates anxiety, as exactly as you say, Joey, you need to get somebody else to do it for you.
For sure. Yeah. So you said a couple of different things that makes me want to change avenues a little bit here. So you teach a lot about action. You said,
Mhm.
during your lectures and to these potential entrepreneurs that are going through the courses, you teach a lot about action, and also with folks that have mental disorders or disabilities, that some of those symptoms can lead to positive, um, those can be positive. So
Yes.
my question is, and I've read a lot about this, and I don't know that the answer, and you would probably have a better pulse on it, is, are entrepreneurs wired a certain way? So this is a question that comes up a lot.
No,
And
they're not.
obviously they're not. Okay.
They're not.
And s-
And I'll tell you why that is. Because, I mean, so we can shape entrepreneurship to be exactly what we want it to be. I
mhm,
mean, you have everything from, just talk about scale, you have everything, from Bill Gates and Microsoft at one end to the guy who runs your corner store at the other end. So we can
mhm,
just look in terms of scale, we have like the full spectrum, right? But also in terms of what you do, you have people that are artistic, but you also have people who run accounting firms. So it's just that the beauty of entrepreneurship is that you have all that variety, and believe me that there are certain kind of traits or features that would apply across this whole spectrum. That's very unrealistic.
yeah.
And if we go back to my teaching, I always start my teaching by talking a lot about what people want with their lives.
Mhm,
I mean, I think we have to start. What do you want your life to be?
yeah.
And then the next question is, how can your work help you becoming what you want to be?
Hmm,
And then number three, is entrepreneurship a path for your career
hmm,
that can help you better become what you want to be than regular employment?
yeah.
And if the answer to that is yes, I think it is. You have to shape that entrepreneurship to be whatever, floats your boat, whatever can take you to that place in life where you would like to be in the future.
Yeah.
And that place is different for everybody.
Hmm. So for people with mental health obstacles,
Hmm.
entrepreneurship can be maybe the right choice or the wrong choice. So for myself, with depression and anxiety, um, growing up with that and having that be a big challenge, and then choosing to be an entrepreneur, I was really worried. I didn't know if being able to control my path was going to put more pressure on myself, and cause the depression and anxiety to worsen, or if being able to choose my own path was going to alleviate some of that, provide some more freedom, and to help to help make the depression and anxiety better. So do you have a framework for thinking about that? For let's say someone that has a mental disorder or disability, they're thinking about entrepreneurship
Yeah.
and they're worried, just like I was. How can they think about that? Because once you jump into it, it's a whole different game.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's not like I can't pull anything out to say that this is how you do it. This is what you need to do. But I mean, I think there are a few things we could think about, and I guess what is your incentive for potentially wanting to go into entrepreneurship in the first place? I mean, I think that's where we need to start. And what I've noticed is that a lot of these people with essentially both physical and mental disabilities or so forth, they have this feeling that they don't really fit in the regular job market,
Mm-hmm.
whatever, because it's like all organizations, it's like in any organization, um, you need to be in a certain way in order to flourish in that organization. If you feel that you can find a job where you fit in, by all means, I'm not going to say there's anything inherently better about entrepreneurship. As you know, there are all these risks and potential downsides and anxiety and hard work and whatnot, you know.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people who fail in entrepreneurship once, twice, and even more times. Some
It's
people
hard all
lose.
of a sudden. It's sorry, it's
Yeah.
hard to hear you for a second. I think maybe your microphone might be
Okay, can you hear me okay now?
better, a lot better. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So what I said is I think it's for a lot of people that have mental disorders or just any disability. I think that they feel they don't fit in the regular job market. They have
Yeah.
a hard time finding a job that suits them, and that's often what kind of draws them into entrepreneurship in the first place. And I
Yeah.
think if you don't have that draw, if you feel that you can, fit in a regular job, I don't see that anything negative at all about getting a regular job.
Yeah.
It's more either if you just have a hard time finding a job, or you might have a job you just feel you're not able to flourish and develop and
Mm-hmm.
advance in the way that you feel maybe you should.
Yeah.
That's when I think you might want to start thinking about entrepreneurship. And also think that, and once you feel that, okay, because I can develop entrepreneurship to fit me and become who I want to be. If you have that feeling, I think the next step is to think about how you do it, which I think is a more important question potentially. And then I think you have all the other, just the general things about that we know from our entrepreneurship research for in general, that you have advantages from partnering up with people that have
Yeah.
skills different from your own.
Yeah.
Don't expose yourself too much financially. Try not to mortgage your house from day one. See
Yeah.
see if you can use a lean startup model where you don't expose yourself to too much financial risk and other things.
Mm-hmm.
Try to start your business while you still keep your regular job. Don't just quit your job and start the next day. Try to
Mm-hmm.
get started, little by little. So we have all those kind of regular advice we can give to anybody that I
Yeah.
think are maybe even more important if you
Yeah.
have certain issues. Like you said, I think it's important to realize I'm just doing a study now where we look at mental well-being, and
Mm-hmm.
we find that consistent with a lot of other studies, we find that established entrepreneurs, on average, experience more mental well-being than employed people.
Mm-hmm.
That's a general feeling, and it's related to this autonomy and so forth. But we also find that in our study, we include those that are trying to start a business. They have not yet started it, and they actually have lower well-being than both employees and established entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm.
And that I think is related to what you spoke about here. There is a lot of stress and anxiety before you know if your business is going to fly.
Yeah.
I think it's really important that you're aware of this. If you're prone to anxiety, depression, it is important to realize starting a business is very tough. It might be, you know,
Hmm.
a good thing when you come out on the other side, but it will be stressful, more stressful than a regular job for
Hmm.
that, at least during that startup period.
Yeah.
And do you have the strength to go through that? And then I think, being open about your own challenges and being very humble about them
Hmm.
is the first thing. And the second thing is, seeking the appropriate help, both
Yeah.
with the business and with life in general.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. It's I'm still in that startup phase myself, and we're it has been quite stressful, especially the last month and a half, with growing it very quickly, bringing on some new clients, and all of a sudden needing to hire 3 people at once, is very challenging. And
Yes,
it's I'm looking for the other side of putting in those systems and processes to hopefully remove me as the choke point. But now that I am that choke point, it is quite stressful, and seeking the appropriate help, I think, is very valuable,
yeah,
because both in business, seeking the help of setting up the business properly so that it can run more efficiently, as well as seeking personal help so that I can make sure that I take care of myself so that the business doesn't crash and burn with me.
exactly. It's interesting. I have spoken to people who run incubators and accelerators, and also venture capitalists.
Hmm.
And they have, just over the last couple of years, they have understood the importance of mental health when you're trying to start a business. And they actually, I've been to several places where they do run mental health programs.
Mm.
So, for example, they might have things such as meditation and yoga
Yeah.
in an incubator every morning. Or I
Mm.
also know this venture capitalist who he described this almost as being like an AA meeting. He essentially he gets together entrepreneurs that he's investing into. He's more a business angel.
Yeah.
He gets together entrepreneurs that he's investing in on a regular basis, and they talk about the struggles they're having, and not so much the business struggles, but more these personal struggles in terms of just finding some kind of work-life balance, and
Hmm.
how do you deal with all the anxieties that you have. So I think I think there people are awakening to this, and of course, as you know, in any other walk of life, uh, peer support groups are just
Yeah.
fantastic and excellent. So I guess my recommendation to you and other young aspiring entrepreneurs might be to seek out peers
Hmm.
and just discuss openly and honestly about the challenges you're having, and that
Yeah.
can probably help you to some extent.
Yeah. I definitely agree. That's something that we're trying to put together. I work out of a WeWork here in
Oh yeah,
Portland, Oregon, pretty often, and we have a monthly entrepreneurial resilience group where we just discuss what's going on in our lives,
yeah.
and how that's impacting our business. So I think that's been really helpful for me and the other folks in there. I
It's
want to
really interesting.
be
No,
I
keep
said
going.
I want to be aware of your time here. And so I want to give you the opportunity to, I know you've done a lot of amazing research and you're continuing to do a lot of cool research. So is there anything that you think would be relevant to the conversation that we've had already about maybe research that you've already done, or research that you're currently doing that would be valuable to the people listening?
Yes, I want to point out one thing. I'm just started that might be interesting. So we do know that people that I call them mental outliers, tend to gravitate towards entrepreneurship for the reasons we mentioned before.
Hmm.
At the same time, our entrepreneurship educations are poorly adapted to those kinds of people.
Hmm.
It's typically taught pretty traditionally. So what I'm doing is that I'm developing specifically entrepreneurship education for mental outliers,
Hmm.
and I hope to develop tools that can be, public available. Everything we do is going to be open access
Wow.
and so forth, so that others can use it. Because I think it's just the things we spoke about, in terms of taking care of yourself, and so forth are really, really important, in particular for this group of people. And so I hope to integrate those kinds of things into these kinds of curricula. So that's something that I hope can be impactful
Oh, yeah.
for,